On today's show, we follow Karem's story as he's in demand in Vienna, in London and Brighton. A hazelnut and praline meringue inspired by the great man. And a tart with a fiery twist, Trianon. Karem was now famous all over Europe and had been brought to Austria by Charles Stewart, France's legendary diplomat. He was cooking lavish banquets at the Congress of Vienna. This was the meeting of the superpowers who were redrawing the map of Europe after the Napoleonic Wars.
Karem and Talleyrand became famous all over France, creating the perfect blend between food and politics. And it was only natural for Karem to follow Talleyrand here at the Congress of Vienna.
Everyone had their negotiation tactics, and French diplomacy centred on throwing the best parties. And those parties went on and on.
Events were not just limited to indoor palaces. There were dozens of spectacular outdoor festivities in Vienna during the Congress. Sleigh ride, open-air concert, hunts.
Karem was now seen as a huge asset, and some of the other delegations tried to take him away from Talleyrand, including the British diplomat and wild boy of the Congress, Charles Stewart.
Charles Stewart was an absolute terror. He was the life and soul of the party who went a bit bad. He was always drinking, he was always wild. I mean, most Europeans thought the British were constantly drunk anyway, but he took it to excess. He was always fighting, and he turned the embassy apparently into a brothel full of servants and chambermaids plying their wares. And it's so apt we're in the carriage here, because that was one of the greatest stories about him, that he was just once going along in his carriage and he got into a huge fist fight with the driver and had to be rescued by the Austrian cavalry. The doings of Charles Stewart were every morning the gossip, and Karem's coming to work for him.
For all Charles Stewart's loutish behaviour, he managed to lure Karem away from the French.
So it must have been more than just the love of Vienna for Karem to come back here to work for what sounds like a very horrible man.
Well, you're right, Eric, because Charles Stewart was terribly rich. He was married to a very wealthy woman who turned a blind eye to all his terrible escapades. And so, as a consequence, Karem had everything he could possibly desire, all the ingredients, everything to make the most wondrous, beautiful dinners. And of course, the Viennese were used to this. They'd been in the Congress of Vienna. They had high expectations.
Karem's cooking became more and more extravagant as any ingredient he desired would be delivered to him. Eric's next creation is inspired by a recipe Karem wowed Charles Stewart and his guests with in Vienna. It's the Piedmontese.
Okay, this one is a bit of an ambitious recipe. It's not that complicated, but I will keep it for a special occasion or that special dinner party. I name it Piedmontese, from the region of Piedmont in Italy, who produce the best hazelnut, let's say, in the world. And that's the main ingredient in our recipe. So first of all, we're going to start by making an hazelnut biscuit. And inside, the filling is an hazelnut cream as well. So we've got our firm egg white, and I'm going to incorporate some ground roasted hazelnut. And to that, I'm going to sieve in some custard sugar and a little bit of flour. And you can do this recipe with almond as well if you didn't want to do with hazelnuts. Pipe out the biscuit mixture in tight circles onto the baking sheet. Make two, which will become the layers in your cake. Okay, so we're going to make our praline mousse. That's the filling for our cake. But the first step is to make what we call an Italian meringue. And it's many types of meringue around, but this one is actually cooked by pouring hot sugar syrup on the egg white. Biscuits been in the oven for 20 minutes. There you go. The smell is just overwhelming. Okay, so those two will have to cool down completely before we start building our cake. So I'm going to leave them here, and I'm going to carry on making our hazelnut mousse. Yes, we're going to have some unsalted butter and some crème pâtissière as well. I don't know if you saw me in the past making it, but I use a lot of it. It's actually a confectioner custard made with some hot milk, vanilla, and some corn flour and eggs, cooked together. It's quite a thick custard, as you can see. Take the crème pâtissière, put that in a bowl, and I'm going to whisk in some soft unsalted butter. Okay, and to that I'm going to add the hazelnut praline. Okay, so that's our cold Italian meringue. And I know it does look like whisk egg white, but it's actually a cook meringue. You can see it's nice and stiff. And I'm just going to add them all in one go. Okay, so now we're going to fold the meringue gently inside our butter and hazelnut mixture. That's going to create a lovely light mousse. You could almost eat it like that, you know, straight from the bowl. Okay, so now we're going to build the cake. So I'm just going to gently take the 2 discs. Meringue always extend when we cook, or the biscuit, so we're just going to trim it. So I'm just doing this and just get rid of 1 disc on the bottom of the ring, the mousse in the middle. Try to keep it as flat as possible. And the final layered, so the flat part facing me, so you give you a nice flat surface so we can glaze it later on. And that's going to need to set in the fridge, probably just for 15 minutes. I mean, it's mostly butter inside as well, so it's going to set very quickly. So maybe put it for half an hour, so you can release the ring and we can glaze it. And in the meantime, we're going to make the glaze. Release the cake and leave to set. For the glaze, roughly chop the hazelnuts in a processor. So now I'm going to mix the butter inside the chocolate. So the butter is there really to give it a nice sheen. You can see it's so smooth and shiny. And I'm just going to mix inside now the hazelnuts with a palette knife. We're just going to spray on the top, so just cover the cake like this and just work it with a palette knife to try to cover all around it. Make sure you cover the cake completely, and before it's set, just move it to the serving tray. Just a little final touch. I got some whole hazelnuts still in shells and some almonds as well in shells. So I'm just going to do a nice little chefy decoration on the top. And to be honest, I think you should skip starter on main course and just go straight to my gâteau Piedmontois.
The Congress of Vienna came to an abrupt end when news arrived that Napoleon had escaped the island of Elba and was amassing an army. The powers at the Congress put together an army of 150,000 men, led by Wellington. Napoleon was defeated in Belgium at the Battle of Waterloo.
But now Karem was famous. He was the world's first celebrity chef. He cooked at Napoleon's wedding, the Prince Regent in Vienna, the Russian Tsar in Paris, and now the triumphant British wanted him.
The British were celebrating their victory over Napoleon at Waterloo. This was the end of almost 2 decades of war in Europe. In victory, the British could start indulging themselves again, in all things French.
The patriotic Brits banned French food and wine during the war with France. But now in victory, they could gorge themselves without feeling guilty.
Not all was happy in Britain. King George III was unable to rule because of mental illness, so the unpopular Prince Regent reigned, and the regency period began. The prince was delighted about the victory over the French.
And to add insult to the injury, the Prince Regent wanted the top French chef to cook for him here in Carlton House. And of course, who did he ask for? Karem.
Karem was offered £2,000 a year, a fortune in those days, and he made the trip across from France immediately. But he wasn't in London for long and found himself cooking on the coast.
The Prince Regent, unpopular with the masses because of the high taxes, moved here to the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. Karem followed him and discovered the best equipped kitchen he ever worked in. So was it the ultimate humiliation for the French to have the British to steal their top chef?
It was an enormous coup for the Prince Regent to grab the most famous, the most celebrated chef in Europe. He might feel as if he'd been a little humiliated at the Congress of Vienna, but now I am, he's saying, the king of Europe. I might not be the king of England, but I'm rich, I'm powerful, and I am going to throw the most wonderful parties in my fabulous pavilion.
I mean, I can see why Karem will have accepted the job. I mean, this, at the time, was the high-tech kitchen of Europe. Massive room, and of course, for the first time, a kitchen next door to the banqueting suite.
You're exactly right. The pavilion was the newest palace. It was brand new. It had been built at an incredible cost to the public purse. Millions and millions was expended on this by the Prince Regent every year, and it just added to his unpopularity with the people that he was building this incredible Eastern palace, which was
like a folly, a bit, yeah.
It was a folly,
Yeah.
and it was his pleasure palace. It was styled to look like a pleasure palace, and that's what he did here. He reclined here on cushions, a great Eastern sultan, smoking, drinking, surrounded by glamorous women, and eating incredible amounts of food. And this was why he was so fat. He was huge. By the time Karem arrived, the Prince Regent was often being wheeled around here in a wheelchair because his legs would not support his huge girth.
Karem had the best kitchen in Europe, was incredibly well paid, and had a wealthy monarch who loved nothing more than to banquet. But he was horribly unhappy, blaming the weather, his staff, everyone and everything. But the truth was, the Prince Regent was an impossible boss.
So straight from the kitchen to the banqueting room, and what a banqueting room.
This is the Prince of Wales' excessive, flamboyant, chinoiserie taste at its most extreme. But of course it was a lie. The Prince Regent styled himself as this exotic wonder of the world, whereas he was a fat, miserable, lonely, melancholic man, loved by no one, hated by the people, and detested by his own family.
Karem was prone to melancholy himself during this time and wasn't used to feeling unappreciated.
Karem worked for Napoleon, he worked for Talleyrand, and the Prince Regent is more trying to work for than Napoleon, who was a man who was obsessive, crazy, and hated food. I mean, Napoleon hated eating anything. And here we have the Prince Regent who loves food, but perhaps that was the problem, because he apparently blamed Karem for his excessive gargantuan size. He was huge. He was so fat that his legs couldn't carry him. He often couldn't walk. He was ginormous. And only the fact that he was Prince Regent meant that any women ever fell for him at all. And he blamed Karem for his excessive intake of food. And Karem said, you know, it's not my job to restrain your appetites. But the Prince Regent could restrain his appetite for nothing. Not women, not food, not drink, not power, anything.
For all his unhappiness, Karem created some of his most incredible desserts during his time at Brighton, experimenting with new ideas.
This next recipe is actually a little creation of mine. I call it Trianon, and it's actually a tart topped with a chocolate mousse. But more later on the chocolate mousse, we're going to have to make the pastry for our tart. And my favorite pastry at all is pâte brisée, a sweet pâte brisée. Better known as short crust pastry. Put some plain flour inside my dish, and I'm just going to do a little well in the center. Add salt and icing sugar into the flour, and then rub in the chilled butter with your fingers. The less you play around with the pastry, the better it will be. This is just combining really the ingredients. That's the kind of consistency you want to be. And to that, I'm going to add 1 egg yolk and a little drop of water. And carry on mixing it from the middle and letting the rest of the dry ingredient getting combined with it. Pastry is one of the basics of patisseries. You know, if you can't make good pastry, you can't be a good pastry chef. So don't hesitate to go for it and make them. Okay, and this is going to have to rest at least for an hour in the fridge. Two reasons. First of all, for the butter to set, and at the same time, we've been playing with it, so at least it will relax and it won't shrink in our tart base. So I'm going to wrap it with a bit of film, so stop the pastry drying. Okay, and that's going in the fridge. Okay, so I got some, it's already been set here. You can see it's much firmer. And with my rolling pin, I'm just going to roll the pastry. Do it as fast as possible without pushing too much. So the secret to roll pastry really is not about just pushing down like this. That's what people do, the biggest mistake. You should really roll the rolling pin, and the pastry should just extend on the top of the table gently. And of course, the good quality of a tart is to have a very thin pastry. So I'm just going to roll it on my rolling pin like this. Bring the dish around. Now gently lifting the sides to push it down. Again, you don't want to stretch the pastry because you're going to give more pressure, and that's going to shrink again. And with the rolling pin, just and with your thumb, just go around, just pushing the pastry to make sure it's right, perfect. And we're going to cook it blind, meaning I'm going to get some of the ceramic beans, because the mixture we're going to use inside is actually a liquid mixture, so we want the pastry to be already cooked, so it will stay nice and crispy. So back on a baking tray, and this is going to go in a hot oven, 180 degrees. It probably will take 20 to 25 minutes to get golden brown, and you can just lift the paper and then see what's going on. Okay, so the tart is baking, and we're going to make a chocolate mousse, and that's going to be the topping of our dessert. Whisk some egg whites and melt some good quality chocolate. So soft butter inside the warm chocolate. You can see straight away make the chocolate nice and glossy. And to this, I'm going to add the egg yolks, 5 of them, and I'm going to mix it. And that's going to thicken straight away, as you can see. Okay, so a good scoop of egg white to our mixtures, just to loosen up the chocolate. Just on its own like that, it's a lovely kind of bistro dessert. And now I'm going to fold that on top of the rest of the egg white. And I'm just going to mix gently the egg white to my mixture. Okay, so when the egg white are all mixed, just fill the ring with the whole mixture. And that chocolate mousse is going to need to set for a couple of hours in the fridge before we start to be able to use it. Okay, so at the moment you must be a bit confused. We've got a pastry shell with still baking here and a ring full of chocolate mousse, so not exactly working all together. Don't worry, it will happen. Check how the pastry is doing. Okay, so that's perfect. We can see the edge are golden brown. We just need to give it another 5 minutes without the beans, so the base as well get a nice golden color. And this is going to go in the oven just for 5 minutes. Okay, the next step, we need to do a filling for this tart. And actually, this is based on a traditional French recipe. It's called Tart Normande, Normandy tart. So I got some chunky slice of apple. I'm just going to saute them in a hot saucepan with some butter and flambe them with some calvados. Unsalted butter. Okay, so now the butter is very hot. You can see in the pan, so I'm just going to drop all the apple in. You don't want to overcook the apple. We don't want an apple puree, we just want this chunk. So now I'm going to add a good splash of calvados just to enhance the flavor. So be careful when you do that. Maybe you're going to get some flame out of it. There we go. What did I say to you? Just be careful. So that's ready now. So I'm just going to move it here. Okay, so the tart is beautifully cooked, and we're just going to place the apple all around the base. And we don't want to add any of the liquid to it, so just the chunk of apple. Beautiful smell, absolutely beautiful smell. So that's going to stay there. And I'm going to grab my final ingredients. Next, a custard. Beat double cream and custard sugar together. And then add 2 whole eggs. Whisk thoroughly. Pour over the calvados-infused apples. Then in the oven for half an hour at 180 degrees. Once cooked, it needs to be left in the fridge to cool and set. So first of all, I'm just gonna take off the ring of the tart gently. Gently, and this is now cooled down. The chocolate mousse, in the meantime, is completely set as well. I'm just gonna remove it gently, and I'm gonna lift it here on top of our tart. I'm just gonna heat up the ring. Okay, like this, and remove, there we go, the ring. Here I got some cocoa powder, so I'm gonna dust the whole tart. And finally, a little bit of icing sugar. And I can promise you something, when you're gonna put the knife through the chocolate mousse, rich with this beautiful flambéed apple on the beautiful pastry, you're going to understand why all this effort was worthwhile. Tart Trianon.